Police have returned to Oak Park Station as the search continues for Gus Lamont. Detectives last week took statements from the family of the 4-year-old, which is part of the normal investigation process. The little boy was last seen on September 27 playing out the front of his homestead. He hasn't been seen since, his family spending Christmas without their little boy.
Imagine a silence so thick it feels heavy against your skin. It is 5:30 on a Saturday afternoon in the heart of the South Australian Outback. The heat of the day is still radiating off the red earth, but the long, thin shadows of the scrubland are beginning to stretch across the dirt. At Oak Park Station, a remote sheep ranch 40 kilometres south of a tiny town called Clutter, a grandmother walks out of her back door. She is going to call her 4-year-old grandson, Gus, in for dinner. Just 30 minutes earlier, at 5 o'clock, she stood on that same porch and watched him. He was right there playing happily on a mound of dirt near the ranch outbuildings. He was a distinct sight in the vastness, a little boy with long blonde curly hair, wearing a cobalt blue shirt with a yellow minion on the front and a grey sun hat. But as she reaches the mound, her heart skips a beat. The dirt is still there. The toy he was playing with might still be there, but Gus is gone. She calls his name, expecting him to pop up from behind a fence or a water tank. Nothing. She calls again, louder this time, her voice carried away by the dry wind. The only response is the rhythmic creak of a distant windmill. In the 30 minutes she was inside, her grandson has vanished as if he were never there at all. Before we go any further into this haunting mystery, I want to welcome you to Crime Cortex. If you are new here and you love deep, immersive true crime stories that challenge everything you think you know about a case, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on all notifications. You won't want to miss the evidence we're about to uncover. Also, I love seeing how far our community reaches. Where are you watching from today? Let me know in the comments below. The vanishing of Gus Lamont on September 27, 2025. Is a story that defies the logic of search and rescue. We aren't talking about a crowded city park or a busy shopping mall where a child could be snatched in a blink. We are talking about one of the most isolated places on the planet. Oak Park Station covers 60,000 hectares. That is 148,000 acres of red soil, ridges, and dry creek beds. The nearest town, Clutter, has a population of only 60 people. In a place this empty, you should be able to see a child in a bright blue shirt from miles away. Yet, as the grandmother frantically searched the immediate area around the house, she found nothing. No footprints leading into the brush, no grey sun hat snagged on a thorn bush, just a void. This was the start of what would become one of the largest, most expensive, and most perplexing searches in the history of the state. Within hours, the local ranch would be crawling with police, but for the first 3 hours, the family was alone in the dark. You see, the sun set that evening at approximately 6:15. That means for over 2 hours of their initial desperate search, the family was stumbling through the scrub in near-total darkness. They were screaming his name into a black abyss, their flashlights cutting tiny holes in a night that seemed to swallow everything. By the time the authorities were notified at 8:30 that night, the trail wasn't just cold, it was invisible. The mystery of Gus Lamont isn't just about where he went, it's about how a human being can leave absolutely no trace behind in an environment that usually records every movement. Every boot print, every broken twig, every scent molecule should have been a breadcrumb. Instead, the red dust of Clutter seemed to have wiped the slate clean. Was he really a good walker who simply wandered too far? Or did something much more coordinated happen in those 30 minutes of silence? As we peel back the layers of the official story, you will see that the absence of evidence might actually be the most terrifying evidence of all. To understand how a 4-year-old boy can disappear into thin air, you first have to understand the sheer, terrifying scale of the place where he lived. Oak Park Station is not just a farm. It is a 60,000 hectare kingdom of red earth and scrubland on the edge of the South Australian desert.
Just yet, but a decision on exactly how many resources remain at the property will be made tomorrow. At this stage, the search to continue overnight and into tomorrow. The lion searchers pushing further and further.
Imagine trying to find one small child in a territory That massive, where the nearest neighbor is a dot on a horizon you could never quite reach. The landscape around the homestead is a jagged puzzle of ridges, dips, and dry creek beds. From the seat of a helicopter, it looks flat and featureless, like a dusty red sheet. But once your boots hit the ground, you realize the earth is full of secrets. There are thickets of saltbush that can hide a grown man, and the ground is scarred with deep wombat holes and ancient, forgotten mine shafts. This is a place where the sun doesn't just shine, it punishes. The soil has a high thermal mass, meaning it soaks up the heat of the day and holds on to it long after the light has faded. This one geographic fact would later prove to be a fatal obstacle for the high-tech search teams. Before we get into the details of the search, I want to take a second to connect with all of you. It is fascinating to see how these stories travel across the globe. Where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. The family living at Oak Park was known for being intensely private. The household consisted of Gus, his younger brother Robbie, who was only 1 year old, and their grandparents, Josie and Shannon Murray. Gus's mother, Jessica, was a hard-working woman who spent her days tending to the station's thousands of sheep. On the day Gus vanished, she was nearly 10 kilometers away, working in a remote paddock. She had no idea that while she was out there in the quiet of the ranch, her life was about to be shattered. Meanwhile, Gus's father, Joshua, lived separately in the city of Adelaide, over 300 kilometers to the south. Joshua was once the frontman for a rock band called the Cut Snakes, a far cry from the quiet, reclusive life his family led at the station. Despite their different lives, neighbors described the family as gentle and loving. Gus was the heart of that home. He was a blonde, curly-haired boy whom his family called shy but adventurous. He was a good walker, a kid who loved to explore the dirt mounds and the equipment around the ranch. He knew the rules of the Outback, or at least everyone thought he did. He had never wandered off before. He was a child of the dirt, comfortable in the red dust that defined his world. The timeline of that, Saturday, September 27, 2025, is where the mystery truly begins to tighten. At 5 p.m., everything was normal. Gus was on a mound of dirt near the house, a little boy in a minion shirt playing in his own imaginary world. His grandmother, Josie, saw him there. She went inside to tend to the baby, Robbie. Just 30 minutes later, at 5:30, she came back out to call him for dinner. The mound was empty. This is the moment where the critical window began. In many missing child cases, the first 60 minutes are the difference between a happy ending and a permanent mystery. But at Oak Park, the clock was working against them. For the next 3 hours, the family searched on their own. We have to try to put ourselves in their shoes. You don't want to believe the worst. You think he's in the shed. You think he's hiding in a closet or behind a water tank. You spend an hour calling his name, your voice getting tighter with every passing minute. Then the sun goes down at 6:15, and suddenly your backyard is a black ocean of scrub. The family searched for 3 hours before they finally picked up the phone to call the authorities at 8:30 p.m. In those 3 hours, they likely did something that every parent would do, but every forensic investigator dreads. They walked over every inch of the ground near that dirt mound. They potentially trampled the very footprints that a tracker would have used to find Gus. They inadvertently wiped away the only clues the earth had given them. By the time the first police car arrived, the hot zone was a mess of family boot prints and tire tracks. When the South Australian police finally arrived, they were stepping into a void. There were no witnesses other than the family. There were no security cameras. There was no cell phone pings to track. Because a 4-year-old doesn't carry a phone, there was only the red dust and the silence of the station. The lead investigators immediately realized that if Gus had walked off into that scrub, he was already miles ahead of them. A determined 4-year-old can cover a lot of ground in 3 hours, even in the dark. The police quickly ramped up their response, calling in the State Emergency Service and eventually the Australian Defence Force. They knew they were looking for a needle in a haystack, but they didn't realize yet that the haystack was 60,000 hectares of the most unforgiving terrain on Earth. The vanishing point wasn't just the dirt mound where Gus was last seen. It was the entire ranch. The mystery wasn't just where he went, but how he could have moved so fast and so quietly that not a single soul, not a person, not a dog, and not a drone, would see him again, as the night of September 27th bled into the morning of the 28th. The search became a race against the elements. The temperature in the Yunta region can swing wildly. During the day, it climbs into the high 90s. At night, the desert air turns thin and cold. A small boy in a t-shirt and light pants would be facing a brutal test of survival. The authorities were desperate for a sign, a hat, a shoe, a scrap of cobalt blue fabric. They were looking for anything that proved Gus Lamont was still out there. But as the sun rose over Oak Park the next morning, the searchers found something that was even more confusing than the disappearance itself. They found absolutely nothing. No tracks, no scent, no Gus. It was as if the earth had simply opened up and swallowed him whole during those 3 hours of silence. When a child goes missing in a place as unforgiving as the South Australian Outback, the response isn't just a search. It is a mobilization. Within 24 hours of the call to the local authorities, the quiet, dusty expanse of Oak Park Station was transformed into a tactical command center. What started as a family searching with flashlights became a massive wall of humanity. This was the birth of Task Force Horizon, an elite unit of 12 specialists including medical experts and survival analysts, all tasked with one goal: finding Gus Lamont. The scale of this operation was staggering. Imagine a line of people, hundreds of them standing shoulder to shoulder, walking through brush that can reach your waist, under a sun that pushes the mercury into the mid-90s. We are talking about 50 members of the Australian Defence Force, dozens of police officers, and over 30 specialised vehicles. They weren't just looking for a boy. They were looking for a ghost in a 470 square kilometre area. To put that in perspective for my viewers in the United States, that is a search grid larger than the city of New Orleans. Every single inch of that ground had to be cleared. Before we get into the high-tech failures of this search, I want to take a quick second for a mid-script check-in. If you are finding the details of this case as haunting as I am, please hit that like button. It helps the algorithm share Gus's story with more people who might have that one missing piece of the puzzle. Also, for those of you watching right now, what time is it where you are? Drop the time in the comments. It is always wild to see our community active at all hours of the day and night. You might think that with modern technology, a child in a bright blue shirt would be easy to spot. The police deployed Polair helicopters and specialized drones equipped with infrared and thermal imaging. This is the same cutting-edge tech used in high-profile recovery missions across the globe. The theory is simple. The human body radiates heat, and against the cooler ground of the desert, a child should glow like a neon sign on a thermal screen. But the red dust of Yunta had other plans. Because of the extreme heat in the region, which often stayed in the mid-90s well into the evening, the earth itself became a battery. The rocks and the red soil soaked up the sun's energy all day long. When the drones flew overhead, the ground was so hot that it matched the body temperature of a human being. The sensors couldn't tell the difference between a 4-year-old boy and a sun-baked boulder. This thermal clutter effectively blinded the high-tech eyes in the sky. The very environment that Gus was lost in was actively working to hide him. With the technology failing, the authorities turned to one of the oldest and most respected forms of search and rescue: traditional Aboriginal trackers. These are men and women who can read the earth like a book. They don't look for a boy. They look for a broken twig, a disturbed patch of dust, or a stone that has been turned over. They are the elite of the elite when it comes to environmental reading. Yet even these experts were baffled. In the end, first 10 days of the most intensive search in the history of the state, they found almost nothing. In the Outback, a person usually leaves a track line, a clear path of movement. But Gus seemed to have left no trail. There was no scent for the search dogs to follow, and no clothing scraps left behind. This is statistically incredible. A child in boots and a sun hat should leave a signature on the land. The only tangible clue came days into the hunt. About 500 meters from the homestead, roughly a 5-minute walk for a child, searchers found a single footprint in the dust. For a moment, there was a surge of hope. It was a small print, seemingly the right size for a 4-year-old. The command center went into overdrive, focusing all assets on that specific radius. But as the trackers examined the area further, the hope began to sour. There was no second print. There was no third. The track simply started and stopped in the middle of a vast empty patch of dirt. Later, another small boot print was reported near a dam 5.5 kilometers west of the house. This set off another wave of frantic activity. Mounted police, SES volunteers, and trackers converged on the site, but after a forensic analysis, the police had to deliver more crushing news. The print was unrelated to Gus. It was a phantom lead in a case already full of shadows. This lack of evidence started to change the tone of the investigation. By October 2nd, only 6 days after he vanished, the authorities made a grim announcement. They were shifting from a search to a recovery phase. In professional terms, that means they no longer believed they were looking for a living child. The passage of time, the brutal heat, and the lack of water meant that survival was no longer a medical probability. The searchers were exhausted. They were walking 25 kilometers a day through harsh, jagged terrain. They were battling strong northerly winds and dust that got into their eyes, their lungs, and their gear. And through it all, the wall of red dust remained silent. One volunteer, a man who had spent years searching the South Australian bush, went on the record with a statement that sent a shockwave through the community. He said there was zero evidence the boy was even on the property. He argued that with the amount of light and manpower they had used, they should have found something, a hat, a shoe, anything. If Gus Lamont wasn't in the 470 square kilometers of desert they had scoured, where was he? This is where the investigation began to pivot. If the Outback hadn't taken him, then the answer had to be back at the start. It had to be at the house. As Task Force Horizon began to read between the lines, they realized they had to look past the red dust and start looking at the people who were there when the silence began. By the end of the first 10 days, the search of the Outback had reached a breaking point. The sheriff's deputies and the soldiers were exhausted. They had walked hundreds of miles, used the best technology money could buy, and they had exactly nothing to show for it. This is where we have to stop, looking at the vastness of the desert and start looking at the math of a vanishing. If a 4-year-old boy disappears and a wall of hundreds of people cannot find a single scrap of his clothing in 500 square kilometers, you have to ask a very uncomfortable question. Did he ever actually leave the ranch? Ken Gamble is one of the top private investigators in Australia. He is a man who has spent decades looking for people who do not want to be found, and even more time looking for those who have simply been swallowed by time. When he looks at the Gus Lamont case, he does not see a tragedy of the wilderness. He sees a forensic anomaly. He points out that the absence of evidence is not just a lack of progress. It is a critical clue. It is the loudest voice in the room. Think about the specifics of what Gus was wearing. He had on a cobalt blue shirt with a yellow minion on the front. He was wearing light grey pants, boots, and a grey sun hat. That sun hat is designed to protect a child from the UV rays of the Outback, but it is also a flimsy piece of fabric. If a child is running through salt bush and thicket, that hat is going to snag on a branch. Those pants are going to shed fibers on the jagged rocks. Those boots are going to leave a deep, clear impression in the red dust. Yet, searchers found zero clothing, no hat, no shirt, not even a single blue fiber. This is where the perspective of an expert becomes vital. Gamble argues that in a search of this intensity, the total lack of debris suggests that Gus might have never reached the bushland at all. If he did not reach the bushland, then we are left with the immediate perimeter of the home. This brings us to a part of the investigation that has not been talked about nearly enough. The search of the homestead itself. I want to pause here because this is the moment where the mystery splits into two very different paths. We have heard the official story about a boy wandering off, but the lack of physical evidence tells a different story. I need to know what you think. Right now in this very moment, based on what we have uncovered, do you believe Gus Lamont wandered off and was lost to the elements, or do you think someone took him? Use the comments to let me know your theory. Type wandered or taken. This is urgent. Your perspectives often highlight details that the mainstream news misses. The authorities have stated multiple times that the family is cooperating fully. They have said the homestead was searched, In the world of true crime, we have to look at the exact nature of that search. Was it a cursory sweep where officers walked through the rooms and looked under the beds? Or was it a full forensic clearance? Gamble's analysis questions whether the search of the structure was truly exhaustive. In a 60,000-hectare property, there are a million places to hide a person, but inside a home, there are only so many voids. We are talking about attic spaces, crawl voids under the floorboards, and the thick, heavy insulation used to keep the desert heat out. There are outbuildings, rusted-out cars, and old sheds that have been there for 50 years. If a child was playing a game of hide-and-seek and got into a spot he could not get out of, a standard search might miss him. We have seen this before in other cases. A child found in a trunk or a locked car days after the search was called off. But the police say they cleared the ranch. They say they drained the dam. They say they even looked in the mine shafts. If the house was cleared and the desert was cleared, then the math simply does not add up. There is also the matter of scent. Search dogs are incredible tools. They can pick up a scent cone that has been lingering for days. They can track a single skin cell through a gale force wind. The dogs at Oak Park Station did not give the searchers the breakthrough they needed. If Gus was on the property, his scent should have been everywhere. If he walked into the brush, there should have been a scent trail leading away from that dirt mound. The fact that the dogs could not lock onto a path suggests that either the heat destroyed the scent, or there was no trail to follow. Gamble has often discussed how high-profile disappearances are handled by the authorities. He knows that in the early stages, everyone is focused on the lost child narrative. They are looking for a boy who took a wrong turn. They are not looking for a crime scene. This means that the house, which should be the primary forensic site, is often treated as a command center instead. People are walking in and out, using the kitchen, sitting on the furniture, and potentially destroying the very clues that could tell us what happened in those 30 minutes between sightings. Let us talk about the trap theory for a moment. This is not just about a boy being kidnapped. It is about the earth itself being a predator. The region around Junta is riddled with wombat holes. If you have not seen an Australian wombat hole, you might think of a small burrow, but these are massive labyrinthine tunnels. They can be deep enough for a child to crawl inside and disappear completely. If a child were to fall into or crawl into a deep burrow, a thermal drone would not see him because the earth acts as a shield. A helicopter would not see him. If the wind is blowing the wrong way, a dog might walk right past the entrance without smelling a thing. The police eventually identified 6 mine shafts on the property that they did not even know existed during the first week of the search. These shafts were between 5 and 12 kilometers away from the house. Some were shallow, but others were 65 feet deep. That is 20 meters of vertical drop. If a child were to fall into one of those, they would be gone. The police searched those too. They used specialist equipment to descend into the darkness. Again, they found nothing. We are left with a void. We have a child who was there at 5 p.m. and gone at 5:30. We have a family that waited 3 hours to call the police. We have a massive search that found no clothing and no body. We have a private investigator telling us that the absence of evidence is the key. If the desert is empty, then the answer must be in the house. But if the house is empty, then someone must have moved him. There is no third option. We are about to move into the most controversial part of this story, the moment the media arrived and the tension at Oak Park Station turned into a literal standoff. Before we get there, I have a quick request. If you have not already, please subscribe to Crime Cortex. We are trying to reach 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and your support is the only way we can keep bringing these deep dives to life. Hit that bell icon so you know the second we drop a new update on this case. The police have tried to keep a lid on the theories of foul play. The commissioner has stated there is no evidence of criminality. When you look at the forensic vacuum, you have to wonder if they are saying there is no evidence because they have not found any, or because they are looking in the wrong direction. The absence of evidence is not just a frustration for the family. It is a haunting puzzle for the entire country. If Gus Lamont is not in the desert, and he is not in the house, then where could he possibly be? As the calendar turned toward the end of October, the atmosphere at Oak Park Station had transformed into a pressure cooker of grief and suspicion. For over 30 days, the family had lived under the microscope of a national mystery, their every move watched by a country desperate for answers. On October 30th, exactly 33 days after Gus vanished into the red dust, the tension finally snapped in a way that would make headlines around the world. A reporter and a photographer from the Daily Mail, seeking to ask the family if they wanted to share their story, drove up the long, dusty driveway of the private ranch. They disregarded the repeated pleas for privacy that the family had issued through the authorities. The footage, captured by the media team, was electric with raw emotion. "Get out! You are trespassing," Josie shouted as she waved the weapon. To the city-dwelling audience watching on their screens, it looked like a scene from a heart-wrenching thriller, a grieving woman pushed to the edge of sanity. But in the world of the South Australian Outback, the reality was much more grounded. Deputy Police Commissioner Linda Williams issued a sharp rebuke of the media's conduct the following morning. She labelled the Daily Mail's actions disgraceful and defended Josie Murray's right to protect her property. According to the official police statement, Josie was not threatening the reporters with the firearm. Instead, she had been in the middle of dispatching a snake that had been on her porch. In this rugged part of the country, where venomous snakes are a daily threat to the living, a shotgun is a tool of survival, not just a weapon of war. The authorities assessed the situation and determined that no further action would be taken against the grandmother. Before we continue with the digital storm that followed this standoff, I want to take a moment to ask, what's the weather like where you are today? Is it as hot and unforgiving as the desert at Oak Park Station? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. While the physical standoff was happening at the ranch, a digital war was being waged online. The vanishing of Gus Lamont became one of the first major cases in Australia to be poisoned by high-tech misinformation. Bogus images, seemingly generated by artificial intelligence, began to flood social media. One viral photo purported to show an unidentified man carrying a child matching Gus's description into a vehicle 100 kilometers away. If you looked closely, you could see the glitch, an unnaturally long finger on the man's hand, a classic sign of a deepfake. These fake leads were more than just a nuisance. They were a form of digital sabotage. Task Force Horizon was forced to waste valuable investigative hours debunking shimmering green items and fake minion shirts that were actually engagement bait for scam websites. These pages used the tragedy to drive clicks, promising chilling secrets that turned out to be nothing but lies. This misinformation created a fog that made it nearly impossible for the public to tell what was real and what was a hoax. Beyond the fake images, the online sleuths began to turn their focus toward the family itself. The fact that the father, Joshua, lived 300 kilometers away in the city, and the fact that the grandmother had brandished away in the city, and fueled thousands of conspiracy theories. People used satellite mapping to analyze the 60,000-hectare property, pointing out suspicious features that searchers had already cleared 10 times over. The privacy the family so desperately wanted was replaced by a digital stadium where everyone had an opinion, but nobody had the truth. This is a critical moment in our story. If you're finding this deep dive valuable, I want to ask you to do something important. Take a second to share this video with one person you know who loves true crime. Our mission at Crime Cortex is to bring the facts back to the forefront and cut through the noise of the internet sleuths. We need your help to keep this investigation moving. As the media firestorm grew, the police remained firm. Detective Superintendent Darren Fielker stated that the investigation was not a simple one and that nothing is off the table. They returned to the property in January 2026 to take further statements, making it clear that they would not rest until every avenue was explored. But the standoff with the shotgun and the flood of AI misinformation had left a permanent mark on the case. It shifted the narrative from a search for a lost boy to a story about a family at war with the outside world. The red dust of Junta had buried the physical evidence, but the internet was burying the truth under a mountain of fake data. As we move into the next section, we have to look at a terrifying possibility that many have overlooked. What if the silence at Oak Park Station wasn't just a coincidence? What if there was another predator moving through the brush, on that exact same weekend. While the eyes of the world were fixed on the red dirt of Oak Park Station, a second mystery was unfolding just hundreds of miles to the west. In the world of true crime, we often focus on a single victim, but the context of what else is happening in a region can change the entire narrative. Just 24 hours before Gus was last seen playing on his dirt mound, specifically on Friday, September 26th, another person vanished into the vastness of the South Australian Outback. His name was Benjamin, and he was 40 years old. Benjamin was traveling in a blue 2006 Hyundai Getz hatchback. He had been seen driving along the Stewart Highway, a long, lonely ribbon of asphalt that cuts through the heart of the country, south of a town called Glendonbo. Truck drivers on the highway that afternoon reported seeing the blue car driving erratically, weaving across the road in the middle of the desert. By the time the sun rose on Saturday, the same Saturday Gus would vanish, Benjamin's car was spotted by a police helicopter. It was not on the road. It was 10 kilometers deep into the scrubland at a place called Wirramina. The car was abandoned. Much like the case at Oak Park, the search for Benjamin was immediate and intensive. Police, volunteers, and those same elite Aboriginal trackers were deployed to the far north. They actually found something that the search teams at the ranch never found. They found footprints. They found tracks leading away from the car, pressing into the dry earth. The trackers followed them through the dense scrub and the heavy canopy of the brush. Yet the trail did not lead to a person. It led to another void. The footprints simply stopped, and Benjamin was gone. The coincidence is impossible to ignore. Two people, one a 4-year-old boy and the other a 40-year-old man, vanishing into the remote bush within 48 hours of each other. This has fueled what locals call the shadow theory, or the outback predator theory. Could there be someone, or something, moving through these isolated districts? Someone who knows exactly how to navigate the terrain and avoid the high-tech sensors of a modern search. Before we look at the official stance on this connection, I want to ask you something. What time is it there right now? Type the time into the comments. I am always amazed by the different time zones our community represents. When journalists asked the authorities if Benjamin and Gus were connected, Assistant Commissioner Ian Parrott was quick to downplay the idea. He pointed out the massive geographic distance between Yunta and Wirramina. Even in the outback, these locations are hundreds of miles apart. Still, for the people living in these remote stations, the timing felt like more than a fluke. The shadow theory suggests that while search teams were poring over the grid at Oak Park, they might have been looking for a lost child, while a predator was already miles away, vanishing back into the scrub. Was Benjamin's erratic driving a sign of someone being followed? Or was it just a tragic, separate event in a month that seemed cursed? The problem with the outback is that its sheer size makes anything possible. It is a place where a person can be 10 feet away and still be invisible. If there was a third party involved in the vanishing of Gus Lamont, the Stewart Highway would have been a potential escape route for a mobile offender. The search for Benjamin eventually hit the same wall as the search for Gus. The tracks ran out. The thermal drone saw only heat from the rocks. The shadow theory remains one of the most discussed possibilities because it answers the one question the physical evidence cannot. How do you disappear without leaving a single trace? It suggests that the trace was never left because the victims were removed from the ground itself. As we move into our final section, we have to face the cold truth of Task Force Horizon. We have to look at the last places they searched, the dark voids that were hidden right under their feet. As we step into January 2026, the red dust of Oak Park Station has settled, but the silence is louder than ever. The case of Gus Lamont has now been officially transitioned to the missing persons investigation. This is the division where the long-term mysteries go, the ones that do not have easy answers and may take years to resolve. Detective Superintendent Darren Fielke, the head of Major Crime, has been vocal in recent weeks. He told reporters that his team will not rest until they have explored every single avenue. He stated quite clearly that nothing is off the table. Think about the sheer scale of what has been done to find this 4-year-old boy. Task Force Horizon has looked at this from every angle. They have deployed hundreds of people. They have walked grids that cover nearly 500 square kilometers. They have brought in the Australian Defence Force and the best trackers in the country. In one of the most dramatic efforts, they drained a massive dam 600 metres from the house, pumping out over 3 million litres of water just to clear the silt. They even identified 6 mine shafts that were previously unknown, some dropping 65 feet into the dark earth. Specialist teams lowered themselves into those voids with thermal gear. Every time, they came back up with nothing. This is the cold truth we have to face. If a boy wearing a cobalt blue shirt and a grey hat disappears in an area that has been searched by drones, helicopters, and hundreds of sets of eyes, the math of a simple accident starts to fail. We are left with 2 haunting possibilities. The first is the hidden void theory. The Outback is full of wombat holes and old burrows that are deep and winding. If a child falls into one of these, he is effectively invisible to thermal sensors and even scent dogs. He becomes part of the earth itself. The second possibility is the one that criminologists and private investigators, like Ken Gamble, keep coming back to. The total absence of a single scrap of clothing or a scent trail suggests that Gus may have been removed from the ground surface almost immediately. If he was taken by a third party, it happened in that tiny 30-minute window between 5 o'clock and 5:30 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon. South Australia is no stranger to these kinds of enduring mysteries. People still speak about the Beaumont children who vanished from a beach nearly 60 years ago. The fear is that Gus Lamont will become another name on that list, a curly-haired boy frozen in time on a missing person poster. I want to thank you for sticking with me through this entire investigation. This is Crime Cortex, and we refuse to let these stories fade away. If you have not done so, please subscribe and share this video. Our final call to action is for you to hit that like button to show your support for the families of the missing. Also, tell me in the comments, what is your final theory on the vanishing of Gus Lamont? Was it the terrain, or was it an outback predator? And before you go, let me know one more time. Where are you watching from? Stay vigilant, and I will see you in the next one.